I came home for Christmas. The house was empty, except for Grandpa eating leftovers. A note said, "Used your $10,000 for our Maldives trip. Take care of Grandpa while we're gone." I stared at the paper. My fingers tightened around it before I even realized I was gripping so hard. For a second, it didn't register. I just stood there, still in my coat, snow melting off my boots, breathing in the strange, sterile air of a house that should have been glowing with warmth. I came home for Christmas. Not just for gifts, not for fancy meals. I came home for something simple. Something I told myself still existed deep down despite everything. Family, togetherness, noise, laughter, chaos. I came home expecting the living room to be alive. I imagined the familiar sound of Mom arguing about the oven, my sister blasting music too loud, Dad complaining about untangling the Christmas lights. I even imagined Grandpa grumbling, yes, but with that quiet twinkle in his eye like he secretly loved the mess. But there was none of that. There was only silence. And Grandpa, sitting alone at the kitchen table, pushing what looked like cold, rubbery leftovers across his plate. It hit me slowly, cruelly. No one else was here. No hugs, no welcome back, no Merry Christmas, glad you're home. Just Grandpa eating food that looked as tired as he did. And that note, that stupid, careless, devastating note. "Used your $10,000 for our Maldives trip. Take care of Grandpa while we're gone." I read it twice, 3 times. The words didn't change. They just settled in deeper, like poison. $10,000. Not petty cash, not some side savings. It was my surgery fund. The money I spent over a year scraping together with everything I had left. Skipped lunches, late-night freelance gigs, saying no to every little indulgence so that maybe, just maybe, I could finally take care of my body. The surgery wasn't optional anymore. Doctors had been clear. This needs to be done soon. But I trusted them. I trusted my family. I thought leaving the money with Mom for safekeeping was safer than a bank account I feared I'd dip into when things got tight. Family looks out for each other. That's what I believed. But as I stood there, clutching the note like it might suddenly vanish and make everything normal again, I realized something brutal. Family didn't look out for me. They left. They stole, and they didn't even bother hiding it. I looked up slowly at Grandpa. His eyes met mine, tired, hollow, but soft. "They left 2 days ago," he said quietly. His voice cracked like an old radio. "They said you'd be here soon, said you'd take care of me." That sentence, innocent sentence, broke something in me. They said you'd be here soon. Of course they did, because that's what I always did, right? Show up, fix things. Be the dependable one, the good son, the responsible sibling, the silent backbone of a family that never hesitated to lean on me, and only me, when life got hard. My stomach twisted. I slowly sat down across from Grandpa, the chair cold and stiff against my back. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't poor planning. This was deliberate. They planned this, booked the trip, spent the money, left the note, and abandoned him, abandoned me. The weight of it pressed down hard, heavier than anything I'd carried before. "They just left?" I asked softly, my throat tight. Grandpa nodded slowly, his fork scraping against his plate with a sound that suddenly felt unbearably loud. "They left a frozen lasagna for dinner," he added after a pause. "Figured it'd be enough." Frozen lasagna. For Christmas Eve. I should have been furious. I should have flipped the table, thrown the note, screamed into the hollow house until my voice broke. But I didn't. I just sat there. Not because I was calm, but because I was empty. This wasn't anger yet. Not fully. This was something worse. This was realizing I had been naive. All these years, every time they needed something, it was me. When Dad gambled away our savings, me. When Mom couldn't cover rent, me. When my sister's tuition was short, me. Always me. Because they knew I'd never say no. And when I needed them, when I set aside everything for myself to build a better future, they didn't just ignore me. They took. Without guilt. Without shame. Suddenly everything about that quiet house felt different. Not empty. Exposed. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a monument to every time I let them cross the line, hoping, foolishly, that someday they'd appreciate me. But appreciation was never part of the equation. I glanced back down at the note. "Take care of Grandpa." Like it was a chore. Like he was a burden they could toss onto me along with their guilt. Grandpa didn't deserve that. He wasn't a responsibility. He was family. The only real family still left sitting in that house. I looked at him, really looked. And in that moment, something shifted deep inside me. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about how to fix things. I wasn't wondering how to make peace or find excuses for them. I was simply done. Done excusing them. Done playing the role they cast me in. Done letting them write the story. Outside, snow started falling again. Soft, peaceful, indifferent to everything that just happened. Inside, I sat with Grandpa in that too-quiet kitchen, knowing deep down that this Christmas marked the end of something. The end of pretending. The end of sacrificing without return. The end of giving endless chances to people who didn't deserve them. I didn't know what came next. But as I looked at Grandpa, his frail hands wrapped around his cup, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever happened after tonight, they wouldn't be the ones deciding anymore. I sat there in the heavy silence, across from Grandpa, the cold kitchen swallowing us whole. Neither of us spoke for a while. Not because there wasn't anything to say, but because the weight of the unsaid felt bigger than words could handle. Outside, the snow kept falling quietly in slow, steady waves, each flake vanishing against the dark glass of the kitchen window. In another world, maybe it would have felt peaceful. In this one, it felt cruel, like the universe itself had turned indifferent to the ache sitting between us. I wasn't angry yet. No, anger would have been easier. Anger is loud. Anger burns and crashes and spits flames. What I felt was quieter. It slithered in slowly, wrapping itself around my chest so tightly I could barely breathe. It was betrayal. Not the kind that comes as a shock, but the kind that whispers to you, you should have seen this coming. Because deep down, I had. I always knew my family wasn't exactly supportive. But standing there, holding that note in my hand, watching Grandpa eat cold leftovers on Christmas Eve while they were drinking cocktails under the Maldivian sun, I realized something far uglier than I had ever admitted to myself. They didn't just forget me. They used me. And they had been using me for years. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes, letting memory do what memory does best, cut deep. I thought about every single time they had turned to me, not because they cared, but because they needed something. When Dad gambled away most of our savings during my senior year of high school and there was no money left for bills, I was the one who took a job after school, lying to my teachers about why my homework was late, scraping every dollar to keep the heat on. When Mom was about to get evicted from her apartment a few years later after her investment opportunity went south, I maxed out my already bleeding credit card to cover her rent. When my little sister flunked out of her first semester at college because she partied too hard and lost her scholarship, I stepped up, taking out a personal loan to pay for her tuition so she wouldn't fall behind in life. I remembered birthdays, mine specifically, where no one even texted. I remembered Christmases spent working double shifts so I could afford presents for everyone while they showed up empty-handed. I remembered the time I got sick and needed help getting to appointments. Not a single call, not a single offer, not a single visit. I remembered turning 17 and coming home late from work, only to find my things already packed because I was old enough to figure it out on my own. I remembered being told over and over again that I was too responsible, that I always knew what to do, that I was the rock of the family. At the time, I wore those words like badges of honor. I thought it meant I was respected. But sitting there now, watching Grandpa chew through the quiet like it was as tasteless as his dinner, I saw it for what it really was. It wasn't respect. It was convenience. I wasn't their son. I wasn't their sibling. I was their safety net, their fallback plan, their solution to every crisis they couldn't be bothered to handle themselves. And now when I was the one in need, when it was my turn to lean on them, even just a little, they took everything. Not just the money. They took the hope I had left. I stared at Grandpa again, and for a moment I wondered if he felt the same, if decades of being used and forgotten had numbed him too. They left a lasagna, he said after a long pause, breaking the silence with something so absurdly simple that it twisted the knife deeper. Thought it'd be enough until you got here. That was it, wasn't it? Not just about food, not just about Christmas. That summed up everything they thought about me. I was enough to rely on, enough to clean up after them. Enough to shoulder the responsibility they couldn't be bothered with, but never enough to truly be cared for. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten as reality pressed in like a closing fist. This wasn't just about $10,000. This wasn't about a ruined Christmas. This was about years, a lifetime, of being expected to hold up the roof while they tore down the walls. For the first time, I let myself feel it. Not just the sadness, not just the disappointment, but the sheer, blinding unfairness of it all. How many times had I convinced myself that this was just what family did? That sacrifices were normal? That at least we still have each other was enough to justify the constant imbalance? But this was different. They hadn't just crossed a line. They had wiped it away entirely and left me standing there, wondering why I ever thought there were rules in the first place. I don't know how long I sat there. Minutes? Hours? The snow kept falling. Grandpa eventually finished eating, got up slowly, and shuffled toward the living room without saying much else. I stayed, frozen, not in sadness anymore, but in clarity. Because that night, in the quiet ache of that house, I realized something I had always been too afraid to admit. I wasn't part of their family. I was a service, an option, a backup plan. And suddenly, I didn't feel sad anymore. I felt done. Done excusing them. Done making allowances. Done believing that one day they'd see me the way I so desperately wanted them to. They wouldn't. Because people don't change when they know you'll never walk away. But I was done standing still. As I stood up from the table, leaving the crumpled note behind, like the last scrap of denial I would ever hold on to, something inside me clicked into place. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew what I wasn't going to do. I wasn't going to forgive easily. I wasn't going to pretend this was okay. And I wasn't going to let them come back like nothing happened. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to be the one fixing everything. This time, they would be the ones left out in the cold. As I turned off the kitchen light and joined Grandpa in the living room, the snow outside swallowed the last of the evening light. Inside, something far brighter had sparked to life. Not anger, not hatred, but resolve. And as I sat down beside Grandpa, who smiled faintly as I handed him a warm blanket, I knew this wasn't just the end of another disappointing holiday. This was the end of the old me, the version of myself they counted on to stay silent forever. And when they came back, whenever that would be, they'd finally meet the version of me they never saw coming. 1 year later. 365 days is not a long time in the grand scheme of life. But when you stop living for people who drain you, when you stop offering yourself as a lifeline to those who never would have done the same for you, it feels like eternity. Life without them was quiet. Not the suffocating quiet that house once held. Not the lonely silence that made you feel invisible even in your own family. This was different. Peaceful. Earned. The apartment Grandpa and I moved into wasn't large or flashy. We didn't need flashy. It had just enough space for the two of us. Enough for his books, his recliner, his little balcony garden, and enough room for me to finally stretch out without walking on eggshells. Most importantly, it had a door that only opened for people who deserved to be inside. I healed that year. Not just physically, though yes, I did get the surgery eventually, fully paid for with the money they had been forced to repay after legal action. But emotionally, that was the real work. Waking up each day without the dread of an early morning guilt trip or desperate plea for money felt foreign at first. I didn't realize how much space they took up in my mind until they weren't there anymore. Grandpa healed too. Having me there full-time changed him. He looked better, moved easier, smiled more. We spent evenings playing cards, watching old movies, telling the same stories back and forth until they became ours. Not theirs. We didn't talk about them much, not because we were suppressing anything, but because some people, once you stop mentioning them, start fading into exactly what they always were, noise. I thought that chapter was closed, but of course they came back. It happened on a Saturday. The sky was clean and sharp that morning. Grandpa had been complaining about the squirrels getting into his tomatoes, and I promised him we'd figure out a way to keep them out. Normal day stuff. Simple. Until the knock came. I knew. Before I even reached the door, I knew it wasn't the delivery guy, not a neighbor. It was them. The knock wasn't polite, it wasn't hesitant, it was entitled. Entitlement has a sound, you know. People who never truly believe they've done anything wrong knock differently. Grandpa came out of his room. He looked at me, eyebrows raised slightly, sensing it too. I peeked through the peephole. There they were. Mom, Dad, my sister. All of them. Not dressed down or defeated, but dressed up. Like they thought this was just another episode in our lifelong drama where they could show up, play their part, and I'd fall right back into mine. They had gifts, as if presents could erase years of absence and betrayal. I could see their lips moving as they spoke to each other, waiting for me to do what I always did. Open, listen, absorb their tears, soften, forgive. But they had mistaken the calendar. That version of me? He didn't live here anymore. I stayed quiet. Grandpa shuffled up beside me, peeking too. You gonna open it? He asked, voice calm, almost curious. I shook my head. No. Good, he said, without hesitation, turning back toward the kitchen like it was any other Saturday morning. The knocking persisted for a while, soft at first, then louder. I could almost hear the confusion turning to frustration, could almost hear them realizing that something had changed, that I wasn't jumping to let them back in. Minutes passed. I heard their voices now, low, urgent, muffled through the door. I caught pieces. Just talk to us. We miss you. This isn't fair. We're family. Family. That word. Once it would have hooked into my ribs and pulled. Not anymore. I stood still, breathing slowly, letting the sound of their desperation wash over me without sinking in. I didn't owe them my presence. I didn't owe them my energy. I didn't owe them a platform to plead their case. When someone burns the bridge, they don't get to demand you swim across the river to hear them out. Eventually, the knocking stopped. I heard footsteps fading down the hallway. I didn't move until silence returned. Real, honest silence. When I finally stepped back from the door, Grandpa was sitting at the table, casually flipping through his crossword puzzle book like nothing happened. He looked up and gave me a knowing smile. Didn't even have to tell him to leave, he said, almost proud. I smiled back, not bitterly, not smugly, just relieved. It felt done. Finally. No dramatic confrontation, no screaming match, no emotional speeches, just a closed door and a decision not to open it. That was enough. That was powerful. For years I thought closure came from fixing things, or making others understand your pain and repent. But sometimes, closure is just deciding you're finished trying. I made us both some tea. Grandpa and I sat together, quietly watching the snow fall outside the window, just like we had so many nights before. Except this time, I felt no weight in my chest, no guilt, no conflict, no urge to explain myself, just peace. Feels good, doesn't it? Grandpa said softly, not even looking at me as if he already knew. Yeah, I said, my voice steady and light. It feels free. He nodded. And we didn't say much else after that. We didn't need to. Because that moment said everything. Not just to them, the ones left on the other side of the door. But to me, I had spent my whole life begging to be let in. Now, for the first time, I understood the power of being the one who chooses not to let them in. There was no big emotional aftermath, no sleepless night, no replaying their words over and over, wondering if I had been too harsh. No. That night, after they walked away from my door, something inside me stayed remarkably still. The chaos was gone. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing after it. I didn't reach for my phone to check if they texted. I didn't wonder if they left a voicemail, begging or blaming. I didn't even feel curious about whether they cried in the hallway after I refused to open up. Because none of it mattered anymore. That part of my life, the part that had been tied in knots of obligation, guilt, and endless second chances, was over. And quietly, without any ceremony, the world kept turning anyway. The next morning was ordinary. The sun peeked through the blinds the way it always did. Grandpa made his usual pot of coffee. I fed the cat that had started visiting our balcony every day. A scrappy little thing that somehow understood this was a safe place now. Safe. That word meant something different these days. It wasn't about locking doors. It was about knowing no one could unlock you anymore unless you wanted them to. Breakfast with Grandpa was simple. Toast, eggs, and the crossword puzzle he never finished. At one point, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses and smiled softly. "You handled that well yesterday," he said casually. "Didn't feel like much," I admitted. "Exactly," he replied, setting his mug down. "That's how you know you're free, when doing nothing feels like doing everything right." I let that sink in. For so long, I believed closure was about dramatic moments. Standing in front of people and saying, "This is how you hurt me." Demanding apologies. Making them understand. Winning. But none of that ever worked, because people who need to be forced to see your worth, they were never going to. The real closure wasn't about them changing. It was about me no longer needing them to. I thought about the years I spent tying myself in emotional knots, trying to make them love me the way I loved them. I thought about every compromise, every swallowed anger, every time I told myself, "It's just family, let it go." Letting it go didn't mean giving them more chances. It meant exactly this. Sitting at the table, drinking coffee, not carrying their weight anymore. They were gone. And somehow, the absence wasn't heavy. It was light. A week passed, then a month. Seasons shifted. Snow melted, flowers bloomed, and life quietly rearranged itself into something new. They didn't come back. They didn't call. They didn't send letters. I knew they were out there somewhere, living however they wanted to live. And for the first time, I didn't feel left behind. I felt spared. Spared from being dragged into another chapter of a book I didn't need to read anymore. Grandpa and I found new traditions. Not big ones. We didn't travel or throw lavish dinners, but every Friday night became ours. He'd pick a black and white movie. I'd make popcorn. We'd sit in the soft yellow lamplight, just existing. No loud arguments, no manipulative guilt trips, no wondering if love was conditional, just peace. One evening, after laughing way too hard at a ridiculous old detective movie, Grandpa got quiet. I looked over, expecting him to drift off the way he sometimes did when his energy dipped. But he didn't look tired. He looked reflective. "You know," he said quietly, eyes still on the flickering TV, "when your dad was young, he used to swear he'd never be like his parents." I stayed silent, sensing there was more. "But somewhere along the way, he forgot," Grandpa continued. "Sometimes people just repeat the cycles. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it forgivable, but it happens." I nodded slowly. "I guess I just kept thinking I could make them different if I tried hard enough," I admitted. Grandpa gave me a look, kind but heavy with the wisdom of someone who had lived through too many similar disappointments. "You can't fix people who don't think they're broken," he said simply. I sat with that truth. Not angrily, but with acceptance. They were who they were, and I was who I was. And that didn't have to mean I owed them a seat at my table. Months later, when spring fully arrived and Grandpa's tomato plants started sprouting again, I caught myself smiling at the smallest thing. A bird landing on the railing. Grandpa humming an old song under his breath. The breeze carrying no voices but ours. I realized something then. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for apologies, not for closure, not for them. I wasn't angry at them, I wasn't longing for them, I simply wasn't thinking of them. That's freedom. True freedom isn't slamming the door in someone's face, it's forgetting they were ever knocking. Later that night, as Grandpa and I sat quietly with the windows open, he looked over and broke the silence. "You don't talk about them much anymore." I smiled faintly, not needing to explain. He already knew. Neither of us needed to say the obvious aloud. When people show you what place you hold in their lives, believe them. And when you decide to stop standing in that place, don't look back. The world is waiting ahead. And so, we let the past be exactly what it was, behind us. With no keys to this new life, and no place at our table anymore. There was no sudden change, no cinematic music swelled as I moved on. It wasn't like that. Moving on, I learned, was never about grand gestures or loud declarations. It was quiet. Moving on looked a lot like the morning after they left my doorstep. It looked like Grandpa humming softly as he watered his tomato plants. It looked like grocery lists that only had things we needed. It looked like sitting on the balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise, with no urgent texts demanding my attention. It looked like freedom, but not the loud, rebellious kind. It was softer, gentler. A freedom I hadn't even realized I craved until it wrapped itself around me like a blanket on a cool spring morning. Weeks passed, then months, and still no word from them. At first I caught myself wondering when they'd reach out, when the next crisis would hit, when they'd come knocking, desperate, asking me to bail them out of another disaster. But nothing came. And slowly, I stopped waiting. I stopped looking at my phone, expecting a message. I stopped checking the mail, expecting apologies that would never arrive. I stopped replaying old conversations trying to figure out what I could have said or done differently. None of it mattered anymore, because their silence didn't feel like abandonment now. It felt like permission. Permission to finally live my life without them woven into every corner of it. Grandpa and I settled into something that felt normal, not survival mode, not damage control. Just life. He started teaching me how to cook his favorite meals, the ones he used to make for the family back when he still believed they cared. We spent lazy Sundays watching old movies neither of us had ever bothered to watch before. Sometimes we didn't do anything special at all. We'd sit in the living room together, reading in companionable silence. Or I'd catch him nodding off while pretending to watch television, and I'd quietly drape a blanket over him before turning down the volume. Simple moments. Small moments. But after years of walking on eggshells, of tense dinners and passive-aggressive comments, and being the designated problem solver, those small moments felt revolutionary. I started finding myself again in the spaces they used to occupy. I picked up hobbies I'd long abandoned. I went for evening walks with no destination, breathing in the cool air and feeling for once that no one was waiting for me to come home and fix something. I reconnected with old friends, people I had pushed away because I was always too busy handling family crises. I even started writing again, something I hadn't done since college when life had started getting too heavy. For the first time in forever, my life was mine. Not borrowed, not demanded, not defined by what I could give to others. It was mine, and I guarded it fiercely, not out of fear, but out of gratitude. Gratitude that I had finally learned what it meant to choose myself. Grandpa noticed it too. "You seem lighter these days," he remarked one afternoon as we tended to his garden together. I looked at him, really looked, and realized he was right. I was lighter. Not because life was suddenly perfect or easy, but because I wasn't carrying them anymore. I wasn't carrying their expectations, their disappointments, their manipulations. I had set it all down, and without that weight, I could breathe in ways I never thought possible. Sometimes late at night, I would catch myself thinking about them. Not in a yearning way, but in the way you think about a book you once read and outgrew. They were pages I no longer needed to turn back to. I didn't hate them. Hate, after all, is still a connection. I simply didn't hold space for them anymore. They were part of my story, yes, but they weren't part of my narrative anymore. One evening, as Grandpa and I sat watching the sun dip below the horizon, he said something that stayed with me. "You know," he began, "sometimes people think letting go is about giving up. But it's not. It's about giving back. Giving them back their choices, their mistakes, their lives, and taking back yours." I nodded, feeling the truth of that settle deep in my chest. For years I held on because I thought I was supposed to. That's what family does, right? They hold on. Even when it hurts, even when it drains you. But now I knew better. Holding on isn't love when it becomes survival. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for them and for yourself, is to let go. Let them be who they are. And let yourself become who you were always meant to be, without them weighing you down. As spring turned into summer, and the world bloomed bright and bold around us, I realized that the door they once knocked on was more than just physical. It was symbolic, and it no longer existed. Not because I locked it, but because I had outgrown the house entirely. And in this new place, built on peace, love, and genuine care, there wasn't even a doorway for them to knock on anymore. They were gone, not lost, not banished, just irrelevant. And in their absence, something beautiful filled the space they left behind. Me. I didn't intend to become the person people came to for advice. That wasn't the plan. The plan, if you could even call it that, was simply to live quietly, to enjoy slow mornings and late evenings, to tend to Grandpa's garden, to breathe and exist in the safety of my own hard-earned peace. But healing, I discovered, has a way of making you visible in ways pain never did. People noticed. Friends I hadn't heard from in years started reaching out. Some were casual, curious about what I'd been up to, but others reached out in whispers. Hey, can I talk to you about something? At first I was surprised, then I began to understand. They saw it, not just the absence of chaos in my life, but the presence of something else. Clarity. Freedom. Not the loud, defiant kind that gets posted online with triumphant captions, but the kind that radiates quietly through your choices, through what and who you no longer allow near you. They saw that I wasn't running on empty anymore, and they wondered deep down if they could have that too. Conversations began softly. I don't know what to do about my mom. My brother always makes me feel guilty. My family expects me to drop everything for them. At first, I just listened. Not because I had all the answers, but because I remembered exactly what it felt like to speak into silence, to share your pain and watch people minimize it. I wouldn't be that person for them. So I listened. And when they were done pouring out years of exhaustion and heartbreak, I said the words no one had ever said to me when I needed them most. You don't owe them your life. Simple, but heavy. I watched as the weight of those words hit them. Some cried, some got angry, not at me, but at the realization of how much they had given away. And some just sat there, stunned, as if hearing permission to stop sacrificing themselves was the most foreign language they had ever heard. I never told them what to do. I didn't need to, because deep down, they already knew. People know when something isn't right. They know when love feels more like leverage. They know when family feels more like a leash than a connection. What they don't know, because most of us aren't taught, is that they're allowed to walk away anyway. Sharing my story didn't feel heroic. It felt necessary. Necessary because so many of us are conditioned to believe that being good means being available, no matter how much it hurts. Necessary because too many people mistake loyalty for self-abandonment. Necessary because I had spent too much of my own life thinking love was measured by how much you could endure. But now I knew better. Love, real love, doesn't drain you. It doesn't demand you sacrifice your well-being. It doesn't make you choose between yourself and the people who claim to care about you. So I kept sharing. In quiet talks over coffee, in late-night texts, in small, vulnerable moments where someone trusted me enough to ask, how did you do it? I never glamorized it. I told them the truth, that it was hard, that it was lonely at first, that I questioned myself every step of the way, but also that it was worth it. Because peace, once tasted, makes chaos intolerable. And once you know what it's like to wake up without dread, you'll never willingly go back to living in survival mode. Not everyone took the step. Some weren't ready. That's okay. I learned that too. You can't drag people into freedom. You can only show them where the door is. Whether or not they walk through it, that's their choice. And that I realized was the biggest part of my own healing. Understanding that I didn't need to save anyone. Not anymore. I could offer my story. I could offer my presence. I could offer the example of my life now. Simple, quiet, joyful in ways it never was before. But the days of sacrificing myself on the altar of helping were over. I lived for me now. And that wasn't selfish. It was sacred. Grandpa, as always, understood before I even said anything. One evening, after I hung up the phone with a friend I had gently talked through her family issues, he chuckled softly. You're becoming quite the wise one, he teased. I smiled. Not wise, I said. Just free. And I want other people to know they can be too. He nodded approvingly. That's the best thing you can pass on, he said simply. Not money, not stuff, just the proof that peace is possible. That stuck with me. Proof. Not promises, not platitudes, not cliches about forgiveness and blood being thicker than water. Just proof. Proof that walking away doesn't make you heartless. Proof that saying no more doesn't make you cruel. Proof that family, as beautiful as the idea is, only holds value when it's mutual. And proof that even if the people you were born to hurt you, you are allowed and worthy to build something better without them. That became my quiet mission. Not to fight them anymore, but to live so freely, so fully, that my very existence whispered to others, you don't have to stay stuck. That's what healing is. Not forgetting, not erasing, but becoming living proof that life after them isn't just possible, it's better. So much better than you ever imagined while you were still trapped in the illusion that obligation was love. It didn't happen in some dramatic way. Not like before, no desperate knocks, no voicemail rants, no social media pity campaigns, no. The final test came quietly, as these things often do. It started with a card. A simple, unassuming envelope slipped through the mail slot one early autumn afternoon. No return address, no handwriting I recognized. I almost tossed it, assuming it was junk mail, but something about it made me pause. Curiosity, or maybe old habits, won. I opened it. Inside was a store-bought card. Simple, generic, thinking of you. Written underneath in rushed but familiar handwriting, "It's been a while. We miss you. Grandpa must be getting old. We should all be together again before it's too late. You know how short life is. Let's put the past behind us. Mom." I read it once, then twice. And then I set it down. There was no explosion inside me, no wave of anger, no sorrow, just recognition. I knew exactly what this was. Not genuine remorse, not accountability. It was the hook, the same one they used for years. Soft words, nostalgic guilt, the weaponization of time and mortality. Before it's too late. Those 4 words were their oldest, sharpest tool. Because who wants to be the person who says no when the clock is ticking? Who wants to be the one who refuses to reconcile when someone might not be here tomorrow? They knew that, and they counted on it. For years it worked. I would have caved immediately, desperate not to be the bad one, terrified of regrets. But now, I saw through it. I took the card inside, sat down at the kitchen table across from Grandpa and slid it across to him. He read it slowly, eyes moving methodically as he absorbed every word. Then he snorted softly and pushed it back to me. "Same old song," he said simply. I smiled faintly. "Yeah," I agreed. "Same old song." He didn't say much else. He didn't need to. Because between us, everything was understood. They weren't reaching out because they had changed. They were reaching out because they wanted to reset the cycle. They wanted the old version of me back. The one who never said no. The one who showed up no matter how much it cost him. The one who let them back in over and over. But that person was gone. I didn't respond to the card. Days passed, then weeks. Another letter came, this one from my sister, softer still, reminiscing about childhood memories, talking about how time heals and family is forever. Again, no accountability, no apology, just carefully woven guilt disguised as affection. I didn't respond to that one either. I didn't get angry. I didn't feel sad. I simply saw it for what it was, a test. Not from them, but from life itself. Had I really grown past the need to be needed? Had I really stepped out of the role they had written for me? This was the answer moment. Not in what they said, but in what I chose not to do. The silence stretched on. I could almost feel them growing restless in it. No response meant no hook. No hook meant no control. Eventually the letters stopped coming, and I realized something profound. When you stop feeding certain relationships, they don't die dramatically. They wither, quietly, naturally, because they were never rooted in real connection, only dependency. And once you remove the fuel, dependency starves itself. One evening, months later, Grandpa and I were sitting out on the balcony watching the sky darken when he broke the silence. "They tried again, huh?" he said, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Yeah," I replied. "You tempted?" he asked, teasing but curious. I thought about it for a long moment before answering. "Not really," I admitted, and I meant it. There was no bitterness in my refusal, no need to punish them, no burning desire to win. It was simpler than that. "They don't fit here anymore," I said finally, gesturing around at our little world. "Our plants, our books, our quiet. They never really did." Grandpa nodded, satisfied. "Then, that's your answer." That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on how anticlimactic it all felt. In the past, I thought closure would come with a grand confrontation, with raised voices and heavy words. But real closure? It was this. Not caring when they tried to pull you back, not hoping they'd see the light. Not wishing for them to finally be who you always needed them to be. Just living without them, and knowing that doing so wasn't cruel, it wasn't spiteful, it wasn't a punishment, it was peace, earned, guarded, and final. They tested the door one last time, but this time, there wasn't even a door to open. There was only me, whole and free. I used to believe that family was sacred, that no matter how messy, how cruel, how selfish people could be, blood made it all forgivable. Family is family. That's what they say, right? But as I sit here now in a home filled with peace, in a life built on choices instead of chains, I can tell you honestly, that's not true. Family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who shares your respect, your kindness, your joy. Family is who shows up when there's nothing to take, who stays when staying doesn't serve them, who listens, not out of obligation but out of love. Family, real family, never makes you wonder if you matter. I didn't understand that for a long time. For years, I let family hold me hostage. I endured things I never would have accepted from anyone else, because the world taught me that DNA was sacred, that blood ties were unbreakable. But here's the truth, no one tells you. Blood can bind, but it can also bruise. And when all you get from those ties is pain, guilt, and erasure, You don't owe loyalty. You owe healing. To yourself. Walking away wasn't easy. It shattered every story I told myself about what good people do. Good people forgive. Good people keep trying. Good people never give up on family. But I've learned something far more valuable. Good people don't set themselves on fire to keep others warm. Good people don't bleed themselves dry so others can thrive. Good people don't abandon themselves in the name of tradition. Sometimes being good means being done. Being done begging. Being done fixing. Being done sacrificing. Not out of hatred, but out of love. Love for your own soul. Love for your own peace. Love for the person you've been neglecting most, yourself. Grandpa taught me that. Not with lectures, not with sermons, but simply by staying. By choosing me when no one else did. By showing me that love doesn't demand, love doesn't guilt, and love doesn't disappear when you set boundaries. He was my family long before I understood what family really meant. And now in this new chapter of life I see it so clearly. Family is chosen. Peace is chosen. Freedom is chosen. And if you need permission to choose it for yourself, let this be it. If you're standing where I once stood, stuck between duty and destruction, caught between guilt and growth, terrified of being labeled selfish for wanting to be free, hear me. You are not selfish. You are not cruel. You are not wrong. You are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to close the door. You are allowed to live without their chaos in your veins. You are allowed to heal, even if they never understand. Because your healing isn't for them, it's for you. And you are worth saving. The old me would have ended this story hoping they saw this someday, hoping they read my words and felt regret. But the person I am now? I don't need that. I don't need apologies. I don't need validation. I have peace. And peace doesn't need witnesses. So if you're still carrying the burden they handed you, if you're still answering every manipulative call out of fear of being labeled the bad one, if you're still twisting yourself into someone small enough to fit inside their fragile egos, this is your sign. Put it down, all of it. Step out. Close the door. And don't just survive, live. Because life, real life, begins the moment you stop begging people to see you and start seeing yourself. And when you do, you'll realize something I wish I had known sooner. You were always the family you needed. You just had to choose yourself first.